I'm Insomniac, and this is the Citizen Stiletto, the thinnest light-powered watch in the world.
Son of a bitch! You done messed up, Aaron!
Alright, well, the packaging of the Citizen Stiletto looks a little bit beat up. That is actually because I have owned this watch for about 3 years, I'd say now, so this has been getting tossed around from one closet to the next closet, etc. But anyway, it's a fucking green box. But you open up the green box and you have the case that it came in. I actually think this is nice. I do like Citizen's packaging. That's nice. Now in here there was a stiletto, but I'm wearing it, so that's why it's not there. Anyway, that's the packaging. I actually think it's rather nice. But personally, I don't really care about the packaging of a watch. It could come in bubble wrap for all I care, as long as the watch is beautiful. But that's just my personal opinion. Okay, on to the important stuff. The first thing that most people notice is how thin it is. This is actually the thinnest light-powered watch in the world. It's only 5 millimeters thick. Now, what do I mean by thinnest light-powered watch in the world?
I can explain.
This watch contains Citizen's Eco-Drive G870 movement, which has no battery. In fact, it's thinner than a watch battery. The Stiletto is solar powered.
Definitely, हमारा जो है bill का जो हमारी calculations हैं.
It can be charged with sunlight or artificial light, and it has a claimed power reserve of 180 days.
Bullshit.
But we'll get back later to why I'm saying that it's only a claimed power reserve. The case measures 36 millimeters and it's black stainless steel, as is the bracelet. Now 36 millimeters is usually smaller than I prefer my watches, but because of how thin this one is, it never really looks too small. The proportions make the case look a little bigger than it actually is, so it all works. In terms of the dial and design, I get a lot of compliments on this watch.
Dude, that's awesome.
It's super simple and understated, only has 2 hands, no seconds, no date, no nothing, just hours and minutes, yet it's beautifully designed and super stealthy. Maybe one of the most impressive things about this dial actually is the amount of 3-dimensional depth Citizen was able to create under the scratch-resistant sapphire crystal, despite how thin the watch is. It's like some kind of insane optical illusion. On top of how sleek the watch looks because of how thin it is, it's also super light. Out of all the watches I've ever owned, this one is by far the easiest one to forget that I have on. You don't even feel it most of the day. One of the only things I don't like about how thin this watch is the crown. In order to keep the proportions correct and not have the crown protruding past the case and digging into your hand all day, they had to go with this tiny little thing which can be hard to manipulate when you're adjusting the time, especially if you have larger hands. The bracelet's gorgeous, and as you can see here underneath, it has a push-button deployment clasp that's stealthily hidden underneath the bracelet so that you almost have yet another illusion. This one being that the bracelet is somehow one continuous piece. The clasp works really well. I've worn this watch tons of times during the few years that I've owned it now, and I've never had one issue with it deploying on its own or being uncomfortable. It does what it's supposed to do, and it does it really well. One of my only complaints about wearing the watch would be its tendency to hide when you're wearing it. As you can tell, it's a dressy type of watch. It's not the type of watch that actually looks good with a t-shirt or even this hoodie for that matter. And because of how thin it is, it slides under the cuff of pretty much any shirt, whether it's a buttoned cuff or even an elastic sleeve on a long sleeve shirt. So if you're like me and you like to have your watch at least partially visible at all times, you have to wear it with your sleeves folded up a bit in order to give the watch some shine, or nobody's ever going to even know you're wearing it. My only other issue with the Citizen Stiletto is the claimed power reserve. Now it says that this can run for up to 180 days on a full charge, even if you keep it in a dark place for a period of time. Now, I never kept it in a dark place. Until a few weeks ago, it always had some form of light exposure, mostly synthetic light exposure, because obviously I don't keep my watches outside when I'm not wearing them, but always in the light. Then a few weeks ago, I made the mistake of putting this in a drawer where I keep some of my other watches, and what I got was a dead watch within about a week. And like I said, the watch is a few years old, and yet this probably wasn't exposed to what I would call a full charge light source before I had put it in that drawer, which would ultimately be direct sunlight for a period of time. But even so, it wasn't no 180 days. It was probably about 7 or 8 days that I had it in that drawer, and it was dead.
What do you mean it's dead?
And believe me, you don't want this watch to go dead, because it's not as simple as just take it out, have it in the light, and then a few minutes later it starts working. That's not the case. It actually took me 2 full days of wearing this watch to get it to run on time, and until then, it was kind of running a bit behind, so I kept comparing this to the time on my cell phone, and it actually wasn't keeping time properly for about 2 days. Since then, I obviously never put it back in the drawer, and I haven't had one issue with it. Keeps time perfectly, and I'm actually very happy with the movement overall and the reliability of this watch. It does what it has to do, which in this particular case is just tell the time. It has no extra features. It has no loom on the dial. It doesn't have the date. It doesn't have a running seconds hand. It doesn't have anything. It's just hours and minutes, but it does what it's supposed to do, and it does it well, and it looks great doing it. The retail price of this watch, if you look at it on the Citizen website, is $495, but depending on where you find them on sale on certain websites, I've actually seen them as low as about $240, $250. And for how sleek and well built and absolutely unique this watch is, it's well worth every penny. If you like thin watches, this is absolutely a timepiece that I'd recommend you picking up. On a scale from 1 to 10 Mike Tysons, I'd give it an 8. And the only reason for me that it's not a 9+ is because of its lack of versatility stylistically. It definitely leans more towards being a dress watch, which means I don't get to wear this as often as I'd like to. And the lack of a second hand. I don't mind simplicity in a watch. In fact, I more or less prefer that, especially in terms of dial design, but I do like a running seconds hand. That's just something that I like to have there, whether it be in a sub dial or in the form of a standard large second hands that goes around the entire circumference of the dial. This does not have one. That's one of my only pet peeves about this watch. So yeah, 8 Mike Tysons. If you have one of these stilettos, or you have another thin watch that you'd like to tell me about, leave a comment. I always like to hear from all of you. Go below to the link right there at the top of the video description. Check out my Patreon page, sign up, let's get this shit rolling, and I'll see you all next time.